How you doing again? I'm Gian,
I'm John,
and we're still talking about Delpit's Other People's Children.
but specifically now we're going to talk about Chapter 2 and Part 3, which is the politics of teaching literate discourse. And at the beginning of the chapter, Delpit talks about how she actually read a couple of articles by this guy named James Paul G. And she was actually given these articles by a colleague of hers, and she read it and she sort of disagreed with some of the things that this guy had to say. He talked about literacy and how literacy is more than just reading and writing, and this is where this idea of literate discourse comes up. And if you refer to page 153, he considers literate discourse to be an identity kit. So
Yes.
It's way more than just reading or writing.
What is this identity kit based on?
It's based on saying, writing, doing, being, valuing, and believing.
Good. So when teachers believe in students, are they going over the identity kit? Are they embracing the identity kit? What are they doing when they believe in students? Is it the total opposite of what G is saying?
Well, I don't think it's the total opposite, but I think the identity kit is part of a person. It's part of a person, but he goes on to argue certain things that she sort of disagrees with.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes on to say, well, two things primarily that she disagrees with, that she finds problematic, are G's notion that people who have not been born into a dominant discourse will find it exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, to acquire a new discourse. Now you can find all this on page 154.
Yes. And she goes to say the second part.
So
It's work that I find troubling suggests that an individual who is born into one discourse with one set of values may experience major conflicts when attempting to acquire another discourse with another set of values. We were discussing about this a little earlier, how you don't need to change your culture in order to adapt to the culture that you're currently embracing.
No, you don't necessarily have to lose that part of yourself. No.
Yes.
No.
I mean, you are definitely embraced. You should embrace your culture. You should embrace your ethnicity, and as future educators, you should instill in your students that they should embrace their ethnicity. I mean, should they completely adopt the new culture that they're living on? Recent immigrants.
No.
Should they try to adapt?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they should definitely try to adapt, but never lose that part of themselves. Of course not. And she even makes mention to that on page 163. She says, acquiring the ability to function in a dominant discourse need not mean that one must reject one's home identity and value, for discourses are not static, but are shaped, however reluctantly, by those who participate within them and by the forms of their participation.
I remember when I took a sociology class and my professor spoke about multicultural multicultural immigrants. They don't longer address themselves with one culture. Now they are African American, they are American Chinese, they are Russian Americans. That creates kind of a conflict as to who you are. Are you American? Are you Russian? Are you African? Are you Ethiopian? I mean, are you Peruvian? What are you? Do you have a double cultural background? Are you two people in one body? I mean, what are you? What do you embrace?
So you think it's a good thing?
I mean, I think it's a good thing to learn about different cultures.
Sure.
Do you leave aside who you are in order to even partially embrace the other culture? I mean,
well, do you think that they had to? Do you think that's something that they did? That they just lost their identities? Do you think that happened?
I don't think they lose their identities, but I'm sure you model it a little bit. You model who you are.
But don't you think that it's a part of the job of a teacher, or at least to help them along? Like if there's a student in your class that's having a hard time, don't you think that's the job of a teacher to work a little harder or to help them with that transformation? I mean, because I'm sure you would agree that in order to be successful in this society, you might have to, try to adopt, different, our cultural norms,
Yes, I know. I mean, how would you relate to entrepreneurs from other countries that come and just invest in the U.S. and they never leave their country.
Mm-hmm.
Chinese people, for example, they have such a booming market. They never stop embracing their culture that they were born with.
No, of course not. No, and they're still successful here.
And they're
right?
successful here. I mean,
Yeah.
they never leave. They never embrace American culture.
Yeah.
They aim towards American culture and sell them things, but they never stop believing in their culture. What right do we have to tell students that they have to embrace a culture that is not theirs?
Well, I don't think we do. I mean, I don't think it's a question of do we have the right, but in terms of, I mean, what happens if you have a student in your class that specifically does not want to learn because it conflicts with their home life? I mean, what do you do in that case?
Well, and Delpit talks about that actually in the first chapter of part 3, when there's a certain tribe of Indian Americans that are not able to talk about other people's opinions. So when asked to summarize a reading or a book, and they're asked for what was the point that the author was trying to make, they're only given their opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And they're failed because of that, because they seems like they lack the reading understanding. Mm-hmm. They can't understand the reading, so instead of giving the opinion of the author, summarizing what happened in the book, they just give purely their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the misinterpretation, and that's exactly completely linked to the first chapter of part 3, cross-cultural confusions. It's not that they don't understand what the book is talking about. It's just that they're not allowed to speak for other people.
Yeah. So where do you think the role of the teacher comes in this? I mean, don't you think that it's part of the job of the teacher to teach all the students? I mean, if you see a student in your class clearly having a tough time, I don't think transformation is a bad thing. I mean, I think the idea of transformation is great, and that change can occur.
Yes, yes, of course, change can occur.
And once again,
change is great.
I mean, once again, saying I wouldn't want to say that like a student has to totally lose their identity
Mm-hmm.
and who they are. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. You should embrace that.
Yes.
But I don't know. You know where I'm coming from? Like,
I know where you're coming from. The thing about change is that it never stops changing.
Yeah.
So that's the point. But what actually we can get to the point of what Delpit is trying to explain to us in this multicultural chapter is that instead of failing the students that have different beliefs,
mm-hmm.
we should adapt to them because they learn, they know what they're talking about, but they just cannot. It's part of the culture.
Yeah, I mean, don't make assumptions.
Yes.
About any student.
It's like the first lecture class, the new lecture. What was it called from the first chapter? When you give a lecture to to a new class.
When you give a new lecture?
Yes, the lecture to the new class. That's fine. That is in here somewhere. I lost it. No, I have it. Teaching a familiar lesson.
Oh, the idea of teaching a familiar lesson.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, what happens to the African American teacher that is trying to engage the students, but he's failed because the assessor doesn't know better, doesn't know that that's the way that African American students learn.
Yeah, I mean, there's a misinterpretation, but I mean, she mentions that hopefully your assessor is aware of this. I mean, hopefully your assessor is aware of alternative teaching methods. That this is how it is. This is something that's within their culture. That
sure.
She understands that. But I also think that that's going to be something that a lot of us run into.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the only reason why this person wasn't completely failed is because Delpit, as experienced as she is, she was sitting on the board of assessors that were grading his lesson,
and she was able to interject.
Yes, she interjected
mm-hmm.
for him,
on
telling him that is the way the teaching occurs in our multicultural society.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that? I mean, how do you deal with knowing that your student knows the content, but because of cultural reasons, he cannot approach it the same way that everybody does? How far are you able to go in order to vouch for them? or can you vouch for them? Can you even do something like that?
Well, I mean, I think in this instance, I mean, I think you could certainly vouch for that particular student, but at some point, and we talked about this before, that there has to be some sort of standards, there has to be some sort of guidelines, and maybe, and I think she addresses this a little bit, opening those lines of communication, like letting the student teacher know ahead of time, like this is what we're looking for, because there has to be some sort of guidelines for all of this, we can't just be, we can't just be going in student teaching and just not knowing, we have to know.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. But it's just like the other example that she gives in chapter 1 of part 3 about the Japanese culture, that they do not state the obvious, and they just continue on going with the discussion.
The students, right?
Yes, without ever stating the obvious, because they find that is offensive to the other students around them, that as if they don't know what's actually going on. And whatever assessor that comes into the class, they will fail you. They will tell you that you have a bad class. You're not touching on the topic. You're just ranting on. And
you didn't present it, logically to the students. Because the students, how were the students to know what was going on? But yeah, and I guess these are very real situations, because obviously she's talking about them. So, yeah, I mean, altogether, I mean, yeah, I don't really know what to say.
Yeah. So, you guys think about that, and you can comment on it, create a discussion, and let us know how you feel about that.
Yeah, some of your thoughts are certainly welcome. I mean, I know that we've certainly talked enough about it. So, yeah.
Next chapter.